Given that we're talking about cashless India, I wanted to show everyone what my wallet looks like. In my wallet I have 6 cards. 4 of them are debit cards. 1 is a credit card. 1 is my driver's license. And the cash section is empty. So I've been cashless for about 2 years now and been trying it as a bit of an experiment to see if I can get around all of Asia. I do a lot of travel to India, Japan, throughout Southeast Asia. I live in Sydney in Australia. And for 2 years now, I've been getting by without any cash whatsoever, which is a fantastic convenience. It means when I go to different countries, I don't have to carry spare change and different notes. Unfortunately, the airlines who collect that change for charity don't get a lot from me. They need to get some tap and pay terminals on the airplanes. But today I wanted to talk to you about some things related to minimizing risk, specifically fraud risk when it comes to post-breach events. So many of you in the room will be from the banking and financial services sector, but we're reading in the papers almost every day about new breaches that are happening out in the wild. And many of these breaches aren't necessarily banks, but the credentials that are being stolen relate to your customers. And I wanted to explore and share with you today about how those criminals are using breaches from those third-party companies, leveraging those credentials, and how you can mitigate some of the financial risk that's presented to you. So because we're very short on time, I thought I'd give you the summary at the start, so that if we do run out of time, you at least know what the 5 takeaways are. Really for us, we recently did a report on how much credentials cost in the fraud underground. And these were the 5 takeaways on seeing some of that data that we wanted to leave with you today. First of all, it's important to be able to monitor what is being sold about your customers in the dark web, in the criminal underground. If you don't know how many of your customers' credentials are compromised, you're really going to be setting up fraud rules that rely on missing one fraud before you catch the second fraud. Being able to stop fraud in real time at the first fraud event is very tough these days. Most of the technologies, including some of ours, rely on patterns of learning. And so very often you miss that first fraud. However, if you're monitoring credentials that are being traded and sold in the dark web, you can perhaps get a jump start on some of those accounts that have been compromised before the fraudster actually tries to steal any money. Once you know that, you can also then take steps, and we heard from several of the panelists today already about using multiple layers of fraud prevention for identity checks and authentication, and I'll talk about that in a little while. Once you know that the credentials are compromised, it's also worth monitoring on your site whether those credentials are being tested. So while we may change our passwords fairly regularly, criminals often take the usernames that they know and test them on your website with random passwords, right? Maybe they've got some rainbow tables, maybe they've got other scripts that are running to test those credentials. If you are aware that those credentials are being tested, again, it gives you an early warning system for some of the fraud that's likely to hit your account. I spoke to someone yesterday. We were visiting customers in Delhi. We were talking about all of the digital transformation happening in India, talking a lot about the things that are happening around demonetization. And as more of your customers are driven into the online world, far more of their digital data, financial data and personal data, is now available online, and criminals are going after that. So identity theft, we heard from the gentleman from the law enforcement about how identity theft is becoming more and more prevalent. And tied to that is account takeover. So knowing that accounts have been taken over and identities have been stolen is also important. And I think in the future that we will see new innovative waves of ransomware affecting both businesses, so ransoming their data through ransomware to try and steal credentials, but also consumers starting to be impacted by ransomware on their personal devices, especially mobile devices as well. We're starting to see ransomware built specifically for mobile. So this is an infographic that you can download from the RSA website. So for those of you that need to go and prove some of these metrics and statistics to your boards or the people that are kind of holding the budget for spending on fraud prevention solutions. We did a study over the course of a few months to really dig into the underground and have a look at how credentials are being sold, but not just how they're being sold, how much they're being sold for. So you can see here on the retail side, things like access to Amazon.com accounts or other retailing type accounts selling for on average between $1 to $3 per credential. For fashion sites or sports sites, the different costs of credentials there. When we look at social, instant messaging credentials selling for between $1 and $5 per credential. Email, so we think the webmail type servers, Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, for example, selling for between $1 and $3. Now, what I find interesting about the email one, 2 weeks ago I was in Singapore and unfortunately I lost my phone in the back of a taxi. It slipped out of my pocket and I then spent the rest of the evening sat in my hotel room quickly going and changing all of my passwords, phoning my banks. It was an absolute nightmare. But I'd lost this device that we put so much importance around. But the thing that I was most nervous about was my email. Because if you think about it, all of your forgotten password reset processes, many of them involve sending an email to your webmail account and click on the link to go and validate the password reset. So the first thing that I did when I lost my phone was change my Gmail and Hotmail passwords. Dating sites, we're seeing a lot of, because social engineering is becoming so prevalent, we're seeing a lot more focus on dating site credentials. So for any of you out there that have Tinder accounts, make sure you're changing your Tinder password regularly because they're worth up to $10, a bit more value associated with online dating sites, and then your typical social media websites as well. I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but travel and hospitality, because of the loyalty points, if you think about your loyalty point accounts are starting to look a lot like bank accounts nowadays. They have a big balance in them. That balance of points can be used to buy physical goods and services. And so we're seeing those starting to get targeted a lot more as well. You guys all mostly work in the finance industry, so you can see there financial services, bank account details between $7 and $10.50. Your online money transfer, so remittance services and things like that, between quite a wide range there, between 50 cents and $15.50. And then on the far side, the technology credentials as well. So quite a wide array of prices that different credentials are being sold for. We're also seeing, because everyone, all these criminals are stealing all of this data, we're seeing a huge surplus in the underground. And the traditional marketplace was, hidden behind Tor routers. You would go and you'd have to be a member of a forum, and fraudsters would go and sell to people who had validated their criminal identities. There is honor among thieves at the end of the day. But what we're starting to see now is fraudsters are saying, I need to better advertise my services. And so we're actually seeing a lot of fraudulent data being traded openly on social media sites. So for those of you that have Facebook accounts, during the next break, please open your Facebook app and just search for CVV2 in your Facebook app, and you'll see a huge feed of stolen credit cards just lying open on Facebook. It was incredible when we first uncovered this phenomenon. We've seen social media groups relating to cybercrime in excess of 500 groups, and over the course of 3 months study that we did, we saw more than 300,000 members of criminally associated Facebook groups operating. And in the last 6 months, that 300,000 membership has actually grown by more than 70%. So fraudsters aren't scared to just, they're hiding in plain sight. They're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, but it's because they're trying to advertise their goods and services. We heard from some of the panelists earlier about taking a layered approach. and an RSA would advocate a similar strategy. We start to talk about omni-channel authentication, leveraging the data points that we can gather. We heard from the gentleman from Teradata about how you can absorb big data to make better decisions. And our risk engine is very similar. So not just looking at the actual authentication credentials, if we look at the top right-hand side there, it's not just about the username and the password, but actually looking at that channel information, wireless access points, your mobile IP addresses and things like that. Looking at intelligence, so that dark web monitoring, bringing that into your decision making. We've heard people talk about device profiling, the history, the browser. Are there any digital certificates? Are there plugins in the browser? And really starting to build up a big picture and a detailed picture about what users are using. Behavior profiling we're seeing becoming more effective. Device profiling is starting to be quite limited in its effectiveness because we're seeing malware actually using remote access Trojans to perform the fraud from the genuine user's computer. And so that tunneling and actually man-in-the-browser attacks are making device profiling a little less effective than it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But behavior profiling, the criminals still can't mirror your genuine customer's behavior. Think about it as like CCTV for your online banking site. As people move through the site, good people move in a certain kind of way, and criminals move in a different way. And then your standard stuff like geo IP locations and things like that, and then your internal threats and working with your IT security teams together with your fraud teams to marry that data together. So making sure that you're using multiple layers of data intelligence to make a decision around risk, and then authenticating with the appropriate level of credential. So for something that's low risk, maybe a password is okay. But for something that's very high risk, you may want to do a selfie. Things like that with face recognition or eye scanning, fingerprints, things like that. Okay. I mentioned about monitoring for credential testing. This is a technology that we provide to customers. You can see a screenshot of it on the right-hand side. The dots demonstrate very, robotic behavior of credential testing. So multiple users, either horizontal password guessing, multiple users with the same password, just testing it over and over again, or the one user trying many different passwords. So being able to spot that robotic behavior is very important. In terms of account takeovers, we've noticed that there's a 15 times higher chance of fraud of new accounts. So this is mule accounts getting created with stolen identities in the first 10 days. So speed is critical. In Australia yesterday, they launched our faster payments network. I know you guys have had UPI for a couple of years now, so we're only just catching up in Australia. But we know that speed is critical and making sure that you're catching those mule accounts in the first 10 days. The last thing I wanted to talk about was about ransomware. So making sure that your data is secure, so that if you do get hit with ransomware, and it's not a matter of if, it's more a matter of when, that your response is not like Uber's, that you are able to defend yourselves in the right way, respond to the media in the right way, and make sure that your data is protected. If you want to hear any more detail about this, I'm going to be around for the rest of the day, so please come and find me and have a chat. Again, just to summarize those 5 things, because we're out of time. Monitor what's being sold in the dark web. Make sure you know your compromised credentials and where they're out there. Use that multi-layered approach to identity checks and authentication. Monitor your website for credential testing. Make sure that if criminals are testing, that you're aware of it. Alert on account takeover, and those first 10 days of mule accounts is critical. So speed is of the essence. And please work with your IT security teams, because new waves of ransomware